Noah, we are back and we are upgrading all of your mid-tier players today. We're getting them off of your roster and getting ourselves into better situations. And I hope you all enjoy the video. Please leave a like if you do. Comment down below what mid-tier players you're trying to get off your roster and what you're trying to do to get yourself into some better situations. And if you want to chat it up with us that much more, head over to patreon.com/Dynasty Rewind. Get in that Discord server for a free 7-day trial and see what we can do for your fantasy teams. And if you want that much more help, there's not much more time left to get 40% off a roster review in the pinned comment below or the YouTube description box when you use promo code Big Summer. That'll run through the end of July, and then it is done. So with that said, Noah, all the promo in the books. Let's get to the content the people came for. Your first mid player coming into his sophomore season. It seems like there's a bunch of opportunity out ahead of him, but is there really? How good is that opportunity? What do you got for us, Noah, with your first player?
Kind of hate to dogpile on the Chargers wide receiver room because, you were just talking about Josh Palmer last video, but my first mid player that I'm trying to get rid of is Quentin Johnston. I think the name really speaks for itself. To repeat something that you shared last video, Bob, actually, the info from Jacob Gibbs on Twitter, the last 10 seasons, 9 instances of wide receiver meeting these qualifications, 24 or younger, round 1 draft capital, 350 plus routes run in a season, and a target per route run rate below 17. Nelson Aguilar twice, Philip Dorsett, Jalen Reagor, Laquan Treadwell, John Ross, Quentin Johnston, and Jahan Dotson twice. But QJ in there in his first season. He hasn't had the opportunity to do it twice yet. He probably will. So we know that rookie wide receivers can start slow. Typically till midseason or after their team's bye week is normally when we can see a kind of shift in number of routes run, how often they're on the field, and therefore their stats, especially for highly drafted receivers. But starting in week 9 of last year is when he finally started being on the field a lot consistently. He started averaging over 80% of the Chargers' offensive snaps and posted his highest finish of the entire season during week 10 at wide receiver 27. Every other week was absolutely abysmal, and that was apparent just from watching the games. You didn't even have to look at his stats or his numbers. It was just really hard to watch the Chargers passing offense in general, but really specifically Quentin Johnston. It just didn't really look like he had a spot on the field. So instead of QJ, I would like to apply the KISS method to him, if you're familiar with the KISS method, and that is keep it simple, stupid. I would just want to see if I can get a 2025 second in return for him, which kind of sucks because, you just definitely spent late first round draft capital on him in 2023, but I think you should cut your losses and don't fall to the sunk cost fallacy. And if that's too simple, you can try to get on the edge a little bit, find somebody who maybe doesn't love JSN as much anymore and try to upgrade him in a 25 first for JSN and a 25 second. And if not a second, then maybe a third. I wouldn't try to get too crazy. I think QJ is kind of a hard sell right now. Either way you look at it, you're going to be losing some value for that amount of capital you spent on him. But an upgrade to JSN or even just liquidating that value back to a pick or picks will probably yield you more in the long and the short term, honestly.
100%. Definitely a guy I want to move off of. If I had any shares, I actually managed to avoid him in all of my drafts.
Same.
It's hard to do. Just not drafting against somebody is easy to do. But, one of the things we look back on, or something that I've looked back on in the past, and something that has always driven me nuts is that, subsequent, quote unquote, and I know it's not his third year, but that 30-year wide receiver breakout, or anytime you see names thrown out for, this player is going to be a breakout. The one thing you never see for players that are going to break out is a lack of production. There has to be some breadcrumb to the breakout. Quentin Johnston has not had that. It's like you said, it was abysmal last year for him on just about every front. I can't expect anything from him. If I could move off for any of these costs, give me a second, let me re-roll and just call it a day. I don't see his value turning around at any point because I don't have faith in the player for one. Never really did. That's why I avoided him. But if you have him, we're trying to help you out, trying to get him off your roster and improve it any way we can. If I can get a second, if I could upgrade to JSN, and I know some people are kind of wary about him too because he, didn't meet the bar for some metrics for a first round rookie wide receiver either. I get it, but there's a lot of context that gets left out with those metrics as well for JSN. So 100% get me away from Quentin Johnston, and especially when you look at how this offense is going to operate. I just finished, oddly enough, yesterday, just did my rerun of my 2024 fantasy football projections. If you want version 2.0, dropping August 1st at Patreon, patreon.com/Dynasty Rewind, get in that gold tier. You'll get access to that on August 1st. Not good. The Chargers offense, not good as a whole. Decent running back room because we expect that to be a pretty harsh shift into a running offense. Justin Herbert, not great. If he, runs around, gets a little more mobile or, gets used more in a mobile fashion, maybe he has some upside, but it's not looking good for that Chargers offense from a receiving aspect. Even a guy I like in Ladd McConkey, just with how limited I think this offense is going to be overall, and Quentin Johnston being as not good as I think he is, extremely mid as I think he is, definitely going to fall short of any lofty expectations you have for the guy. So if you can cut bait for anything in this realm of value, definitely want to do that. And Quentin Johnston is a player I want to get off my roster before I'm stuck with a player like Courtland Sutton. I'm not. But if I was stuck with Courtland Sutton, this player might be the middest of the mid players. I mean, if there's a poster child for mid, it's got to be Courtland Sutton. In seasons where he has played 15 games or more throughout his entire career, wide receiver 35, wide receiver 43, wide receiver 44, wide receiver 19, look out, wide receiver 48. You'd think just off of attrition, he'd finish higher than that playing so many games. Several of these years were when it was still 16 game seasons. So it's just hard to believe that he's finished so poorly despite being primarily the wide receiver one throughout the course of his career. Outside of, I think, the first season he was there, it's been pretty much the Courtland Sutton show. Very low ratings. Should have gotten canceled a while ago. Probably outstayed its welcome on the network. But moving back, I know that the situation in Denver has not been great at the quarterback position throughout his career. Pretty much ever since Peyton left, it's been a lot of ups and downs, a lot of uncertainty. They haven't been able to hold down that quarterback room much for anything. But I don't know if there's ever been a wide receiver that was the wide receiver one in an offense that managed to score this low so consistently throughout his entire career, outside of the one wide receiver 19 finish. Get him off my roster. Some recent trades on Dynasty Daddy suggest I can pivot to Raheem Mostert, a trade I've continued to bring up on this channel. Just criminal that anybody is doing that. I've seen it multiple times now on Dynasty Daddy that this trade has happened. So hopefully somebody's taking this from the video. If they're not, whatever, somebody's making great deals moving off of Courtland Sutton. Maybe that trade just got vetoed and they had to swap it back. I don't know. Another pivot option, Jalen Polk. Give me the upside again on a late second round rookie, the 2024 210, which effectively could be Jalen Polk amongst plenty of other players who you might like more than Jalen Polk. And then a 26 second and a 25 third. The fact that you can get anything on top of a second round pick for Courtland Sutton ever, it's just not great. And that's just selling Courtland Sutton straight up. I don't know if people have lofty expectations with Bo Nix, and I like Bo Nix as much as the next guy, probably more than the next guy. But I know that rookie quarterbacks with not good pieces around them struggle their first year. I think that's definitely going to happen for Bo Nix. And Courtland Sutton, again, is just going to turn in probably a wide receiver 40 season, if I had to guess. Wide receiver 40 plus. Maybe he gets back into those 30s, and that's doing a heck of a lot for you. But another deal I came across was making the move to tier up to a Chris Godwin, who's somebody I know we like. Should find himself in a better situation returning to the slot this year, where he's had some of his best production. I do have some concerns with Dave Canales leaving town, but when I think about it, Chris Godwin was good before Dave Canales came to town. He's probably going to be just fine after Dave Canales leaves. So I think more often than not, you do have to add something to Sutton to make it move up in these deals. But I'm more than happy adding a third to help along deals for Raheem Mostert, Jalen Polk, the 2024 210, or that second and third. And I'd be happy adding a second-round pick, a 26 second, ideally, to upgrade to Chris Godwin, get Courtland Sutton off of my roster, and the madness that ever was, will be, is with Courtland Sutton. Get him off your roster. What do you think, Noah?
No pun intended. He's just been riding his whole career. He's not finishing first. He's not finishing last. I mean, depending on what your definition of last is, but
That's awesome.
he's just not it. And honestly, I mean, the value is there. I can go with any of these ideas that you mentioned. I'm not a huge Godwin fan, but I think that that's a great value. Like I couldn't argue as if that popped up in my league chat. Number one, it wouldn't be involving myself, but number two, I'd be like, hey, fair enough. Yeah, I agree. I think of all the players that we've talked about, Courtland Sutton isn't somebody that I'm like absolutely dying to get off my roster, but he's certainly not helping anything there either. So I think you made some very good points here.
I think there just comes a time where he's replaceable. Like, just almost anything I could pivot to would get me similar points, similar production, and yields more upside. And whenever a player checks those boxes for me and somehow holds value to people, see you later. Get off my roster. We're done. Speaking of done, we're done with that segment, but we got a few more here for you. We got Derek Carr. Noah, you got Derek Carr, I should say. Couldn't agree more. Go ahead. Talk Derek Carr. Why is he mid? Why are you getting him off your roster? What are you getting him off your roster for?
You opened up talking about Courtland Sutton, saying, is there a player more mid than Courtland Sutton? And I think I might have you beat here with Derek Carr. To take the route you went, Derek Carr has been in the league since 2014. But, man, we're talking QB finishes of 20, 14, 12, 12, 19, 20, 17, 14, 13, 17, and 16. He's always been good enough to be on your super flex roster. But, before I say anything, I very well could end up regretting this take. But I have never been a huge fan of Carr. He's always been the definition of a mid quarterback to me. He's one of those guys where you can't see him winning a Super Bowl, but he's, pretty unarguably a top 32 quarterback in the league in any given year. I don't think there's 32 guys better than him, so he's going to be a starter. I didn't even realize that he had the 13th most passing yards in the league last year. Even with all the quarterback injuries last year, I still feel like this is impressive given how little I heard from New Orleans in the fantasy department. We talked about the players, but there was nothing ever like really exciting coming out of that team last year. And browsing through his stats, most of his stats aren't bad at all, which makes me wonder even more how he ended up as the QB 16 last year. And after his mark at QB 16 is where you start to hit almost all of the other dudes who only played 12 games, 11 games, 10 games. Of the quarterbacks who played pretty much an entire year, he was at the bottom of that list. Which is one plus you can give him. He doesn't really miss games in his career. Like, he's averaging less than one a year to his benefit. Things could really turn around this season with Clint Kubiak, offensive coordinator. I'm excited to see how he does there. I'm a big Clint Kubiak fan, but I also just feel like this has just been his entire career, just like what we just said. Above average, but unable to ascend any higher than that. One of the most concerning things to me about him, and this has kind of been a theme among some of these players I've talked about, is the team and the organization around them. The Saints are one of the worst run teams in the league in terms of handling player contracts. So that makes it really hard to put good players around their stars, and it also makes it difficult to retain their high-tier players as well. Going into 2025, they are currently looking at being $91 million over the cap. The next worst team is $59 million over. Derek Carr's contract is a nightmare. They had to restructure earlier this year to save $23 million in cap space for this year, and next year isn't any better. If he's still on the roster in March 2025, he will have his $30 million salary for next year guaranteed. and they could technically cut him and save 1.3 million, but it would leave them with 50 million in dead cap space. In 2026, they can cut him and save 32 million, but they will still end up with 28.6 million in dead cap. And that's all just because of Carr. That's not talking about any other players. It doesn't make sense for them to not keep and use him for the next 2 years, but they will have to have a solid answer for Chris Olave at the quarterback spot if they want to keep him around, not to mention having to find some way to be able to pay him, which also makes me think they might be trying to look for a quarterback in next year's draft or the draft after that. Maybe it won't all matter on the field, but I can see okay performance getting worse as he reaches his mid-30s and things within the organization begin to sour due to a lack of money. All of that said, instead of Derek Carr, I would be trying to upgrade to Jared Goff if I could. Goff has been my favorite fantasy value of any player in the past year because while he is far from the greatest quarterback to ever touch the field, he does well when he's in a comfortable system, or at least a system that he feels comfortable in, which was the Rams the year that they made it to the Super Bowl and played in the most boring Super Bowl I've ever seen. And last year, since he's been with the Lions, since Dan Campbell's been in town. People have been concerned about his longevity with the team, but those concerns were absolutely erased when he received a 4-year, $212 million extension with $170 million of that guaranteed just a couple of months ago. He has an overabundance of weapons, not including JMO, as you'll hear me talk about in a minute. And I'm not sure the new contract has reached its way to fantasy owners' valuations just yet either. I'd start by shooting my shot of Derek Carr in the 2025 first for the QB7 from last year and the guy with the second and fourth most yards and touchdowns, respectively, as well.
I absolutely love this pivot up. If you can move off Derek Carr any way you can, this is a pathway I'd love to take. Getting to Jared Goff, more solid team situation, solid player situation, putting up elite numbers. You touch on Derek Carr, quarterback 16 when you look at the yearly stats, but you go to fantasy points per game, and this is how he's done it and managed to stay good. Doesn't miss a lot of games. He wins on attrition. He doesn't miss a lot of games. You go to fantasy points per game, quarterback 27. And that's, I mean, it's because he's playing all these games. But yeah, you look ahead of him. I mean, plenty of guys who've missed half the season, less than half the season. Jake Browning was ahead of the guy. And it's like, this is how he does it, and this is how he stays relevant. But at the end of the day, you might feel good about having quarterback 16 on the year. But this is why points per game sometimes can bite you in the butt one way or another looking at it. If you think, well, Derek Carr was quarterback 16 last year, I'm getting him at quarterback 30 prices. Well, unfortunately, he was quarterback 30 on the fantasy points per game. So it's just not a great way to be. So definitely want to move off. I love this pivot. I don't know if it's super likely unless, I think you'd have to be pretty low on Goff or pretty high on the 25 first round class. Both can be true. Depends on what Jared Goff is for you on your team. Are you stacked in as your quarterback 3? If you're a new league, I doubt that. But if you're an active league that's been kicking around for a while and you've been able to build up assets, who knows? Maybe he is, and you don't need Jared Goff as your quarterback 3. You want to pivot to Derek Carr, who is a super functional quarterback 3 in Superflex, but then you get that first round pick on top 2. You might be able to pivot to something better. But knowing how people feel about Derek Carr more often than not, I don't know. I struggle. But hey, I also know people have poo-pooed on Jared Goff for a long time. There's 212 million reasons why to not poo-poo on Jared Goff, but
yeah, and that's why I said, I'd start there. If I had to add a little bit more onto it, I'd have no issue with that. That's, there are people out there who take that. I'd happily throw on a second or Courtland Sutton or, a couple of other things. Whatever would make it go through, I would be besides another first, I would add a lot of things to turn Derek Carr in a 2025 first plus into Jared Goff for sure.
Fair enough. Well, we will move right along and we'll talk about my next mid player, and that is Jerry Jeudy. And by the way, all these mid players were candidatized, I guess you could say, or put up for candidacy by our Discordians. If you want to hang out with them, patreon.com/Dynasty Rewind. Get over there for a free week in the Discord, see what we can do for your fantasy teams. But Jerry Jeudy, if nothing else, he's consistent at falling short of expectations. I must have just watched an episode of The Office because I put boom roasted after the end of that. I don't feel like that was that funny or deserved it, but I must have been in a mood when I was filling out the show sheet. But either way, while he has a refreshed opportunity in Cleveland, in which, hey, some guys just need a change of scenery. Refresh is in absolute quotes because there are question marks. I'll be the first to say they have the most annoying team trying to project between what to expect out of that running back room with the Chubb injury. How's that going to, he's an older running back, not his first knee injury either. Pretty devastating injury, multiple ligaments, whatever the case is. Then you have Deshaun Watson. Then you have Jerry Jeudy. How does he factor into this offense? And you still have Amari Cooper there. So I have to imagine Jerry Jeudy is going to function as the second, possibly the third target behind David Njoku in this offense. But either which way, throughout his career in Denver, consistently mid performances. Another guy who never rose to the occasion, had some issues with injuries, you name it, bad quarterback play. Maybe this new situation can sprinkle some hype on a player whose value has definitely lost its luster. And I mean, I remember times where people were throwing first-round picks at Jerry Jeudy and more to get the guy. And I know I had him on my roster at one point, and somebody else offered me a first and a second, and I hope I took that trade. I hope I did. I don't remember. It's been a while, but I like to think past Bob had his poop together. But either which way, looking at some trades on Dynasty Daddy, some possible swaps include Derrick Henry and a future second-round pick. So moving Jerry Jeudy for Derrick Henry, love that as a competitive team. Or you get a future second-round pick, all about that as well. Derrick Henry obviously near the end of his productive stretch, but man, give me pieces that have produced, or let me re-roll on a second-round pick that I can use to draft someone, or possibly trade that pick for another player. We have our series every offseason, what we trade our first and second-round picks for. That's exactly what I'm trying to do with this. Remember, not everyone loves every player, but almost everyone will love draft picks, especially around draft season. Everybody as a rookie is so good until they touch the field and poop the bed, and then they're just not as exciting anymore. They turn into Jerry Jeudy. They turn into Quentin Johnston. They turn into next year's this, that, and the other thing that fall short of expectations and make us sad. The next player you'll talk about is a prime example as well. Obviously, these guys were drafted a little higher in rookie drafts, I think, but you get it. Give me the re-roll. I don't want to deal with this situation. I think there's a very, very, very real chance that Jerry Jeudy is the third target in this offense behind Cooper and Njoku. The only thing that gives me some pause is that contract, which is a pretty decent contract. It's not like, market setting or anything like that, but it's, as far as wide receivers are getting paid these days, for what Jerry Jeudy has done, it was a lot more than I was expecting him to get paid. So that gives me some pause. Noah, what are you trying to do with Jerry Jeudy? What do you think about these moves here?
It's the first time I've laid eyes on that contract. That's kind of crazy.
Isn't it though?
3-year, $52 million with $41 million of it guaranteed.
Nuts.
Sheesh.
Yeah.
They're paying Jeudy rookie season prices out here. Sheesh.
They're paying him fresh out the draft prices. That ain't even him touching the field yet.
Good Lord. That's kind of crazy. That's but hey, the Browns are not known for being a really well-run organization either. But yeah, I mean, looking at this, like, I definitely think it's possible. If somebody was hitting my inbox with trying to send me Jerry Jeudy for Henry or second, I wouldn't be a fan of it.
Sure.
Jerry Jeudy, as you said, consistently falling short of expectations. He didn't do much in Denver. I really don't feel better. I might actually feel a little worse about him being in Cleveland. So I definitely do want to get rid of him. But like, if I could get a second, I am all in for that. And that's another theme, another common theme of this series that we've done here is like, capitalize on this offseason hype. That's a big thing that you're trying to do here, especially for these mid players. But yeah, if I could pull off one of those pivots, I absolutely would. If I was a competitor, I would happily send Jeudy and a third for
I
Derrick
was just gonna
Henry
say
every
that.
day of the week. Every
Yeah.
single day of the week, I would do that. So yeah, I mean, and all about the re-rolls too. That's another big thing about these mid guys. Is don't be afraid to just turn them to a second and try again. But I agree. I agree with the assessment of Jeudy. Didn't turn out to who we wanted him to be, but he's not completely dead in the water yet in a
Yeah.
value stance. So
Yeah, and that's one thing to keep in mind, the market at large. I mean, we were doing a keep trade cut series a couple months back now, and one of the questions in the live stream we did was, "Do I cut Jeudy?" And I'm like, "Well, as much as I want to, I just
yeah.
this contract for one, you can't cut him because they are somewhat invested. He's going to get run. Two, there should be some value attached to him, and you can't cut the value that he is to somebody. Still, somebody has faith. A team with I know we're kind of at a part of the offseason where you'd think everybody kind of has their direction set in mind, where Derrick Henry isn't still on non-competitive teams. You'd think that, but just because Derrick Henry is a quote unquote strictly competitive asset doesn't mean that's the only teams he's on. It's just not possible that he's only on competitive teams. So knock on some doors, see what you can do to get in some Derrick Henry shares for your competitive rosters, or hey, just take that re-roll in the future second round picks. If it's a thing of going for a second, I'd throw a third on Jeudy for that as well. Throw the third on top of Jeudy, throw the 26th third on top of Jeudy to try to get a 25 second. Upgrade your year, upgrade your round at the price of Jerry Jeudy. I think you're out pretty free on that one. You got Jameson Williams here, who has disappointed a many few for the first 2 years of his career. Is this the year he turns around, or does he stay mid? Maybe a little above mid. Who knows? Noah, what do you got? Why are you moving him?
For us to believe in a player to stop being mid, we have to have some sort of a, crumb trail to follow them to where they'd be, to that third year breakout. JMO has had a rough start to his career. We know that he missed the first 11 games of the 2022 season, which was his rookie season, due to tearing his ACL back in January, playing for Alabama in the national championship game. The extent of his on-field involvement in that season was through week 17, and he was limited to 38 routes, leading to a single catch for a 41-yard touchdown in week 14. Typically it's already pretty hard for a wide receiver to bounce back from a poor to non-existent rookie season. And that's regardless of the reason why, whether he just didn't get playing time or he was injured. Like, it doesn't matter, because really, you really need snaps early in your career to have a chance at a decent length, fruitful career. But tragedies happen. Let's forget 2022, act like 2023 will be his first real season. Then he's suspended for gambling through week 6 of 2023. He was reinstated a game early, though, and was able to get in 223 routes for 42 targets and 24 receptions, which led to 354 yards and 2 touchdowns before another minor ankle injury in week 17 that kept him out of the playoff, kept him out till the playoffs. He was primarily used as a field stretcher, though, from what I can tell, because he had a 15-yard average depth of target. And just to give you an idea, the next highest was Josh Reynolds with 11. The lack of really being able to see anything at all from him through his first 2 years. And again, it doesn't even matter why, there's still nothing. That's a lot of my gripe with Ladd McConkey's college production. I know he was injured, but we don't have anything to really back it up other than just saying, well, he looks good, but back to JMO, it's enough for me to be completely out on him, even with his 12th overall draft cap in 2022. But on top of that, the Lions have also more than filled the offensive gap already with the additions of Sam Laporta and Jahmyr Gibbs in last year's draft. And between them and Amon-Ra St. Brown, he would, at the very best, be the 4th option in the Lions offense. That, combined with having no tangible evidence that he is or can be an excellent pro receiver, has left me with next to no interest in him anymore, even as an Alabama homer. So who I'm targeting instead, I'm not someone who just believes that we can always have high tier players on the roster. We will always have mid players, or at least players who aren't very exciting on our roster, but not all mid players are created equal. So I want to pivot off of JMO in a bit of a down, not downgrade, but tear down. That's the word I was looking for. I want to tear down off of JMO into Wan'Dale Robinson. Last season, Wan'Dale hovered around the wide receiver 35 to 45 in categories like yak per reception, missed tackles forced per reception, and he had 60 receptions too last season. So those numbers aren't like artificially pumped up just because there wasn't a lot to go off of. Now, I know 60 isn't a lot, but the Giants also tried to keep the ball on the ground a lot last season too, for obvious reasons. I think New York drafting Malik Neighbors was the best thing that could have ever happened to Wan'Dale's stock, because Robinson was never going to be a wide receiver one for a team, but he fits the mold of an excellent wide receiver two slot type guy. And that's assuming Neighbors does move to the outside, which wasn't where he spent the majority of his college snaps. Obviously, Daniel Jones is a notable question mark, which could have a bad effect, but the G-Men did also add Drew Lock in free agency, and should anything happen to Danny Dimes, I'd still feel much better about their wide receivers than Lock than I would with Tommy DeVito from last season. No shade to Tommy. I did love watching him play in those games. So, again, we talked about hype, especially at this time of year with training camp, a month before the season. I want to play off of hype even more. People are starting to get real eager for the season, latching on to any narrative that they can find. And it's open season for coaches talking up their mid wide receivers. Shout out John Harbaugh talking about Rashad Bateman the other day. There are plenty of people out there that still think that getting Chambo for his current price is a steal. So I think it'd be pretty easy to send Jameson Williams for Wan'Dale Robinson and a 2025 third, if for no other reason than Lions offense versus Giants offense. I think it could be a good pivot and an interesting tear down from a player like JMO, who you would normally only think you could tear up from.
Would you like to know, before I get into my rebuttal, since I just did my projections on the Giants and I did the Lions a little bit ago, would you like to know how many receptions I have for Wan'Dale Robinson and Jameson Williams, respectively?
Sure.
For fun. 45 receptions for Jameson Williams, 69 nice for Wan'Dale Robinson. There you go. Whatever that is to anybody, I don't know. But I love that you brought up the point, and we try to continually bring this up anytime we see injuries that pop up early in a rookie's career, because missing reps is missing development. Because when you're not playing, even if you're in the film room, in meeting rooms, things like that, it's not physically doing the things you need to be doing to improve. I had my question marks as a prospect for Treylon Burks, but once he started missing time early for whatever the case was, missing time, at the end of the day, you're just not developing. And for a player that needs development, it's just not going to happen. Definitely think of JMO as purely a deep threat anyway. You touched on it beautifully again, the fourth at best receiving option in this offense. And I think that is where he probably settles in. I'll give him more target share than Khalif Raymond and anybody else they bring in there. So I think that's more than fair. But and the thing about it is Jameson Williams will have his games. He will. He's that type of player who will have 100 yards and 2 touchdowns on 2 catches. He is just that type of player. But at the end of the day, you're never going to know when to start him. And if you're ever relying on that consistency, or not consistency, but if you're ever relying on that pop-off game, it's going to come on the back, because you're starting him during a bye week. You're starting him during this, that, or the other thing. Whereas, especially in a PPR format, I think Wan'Dale Robinson can be a solid enough, deeper flex option for you that's more consistent. I'd rather be able to chuck in my flex and feel good about getting 8 points than chucking Jameson Williams into my flex and getting 2 points or maybe 20. Cool. But maybe my team's built that way. I wouldn't count on it, though. I wouldn't count on that much for JMO either. But either way, love the points here. Definitely want to move off of Jameson Williams anywhere I can. Moving along to the last player, and a player who isn't bad, but is just kind of mid. And if he's your tight end 2, I say good on you. I don't think there's a huge reason to upgrade him or anything like that. But Dallas Goedert topped out tight end 10 in 2019. Ever since then, He's been a fringe tight end 1 or 2, a fringe tight end or 2. So on the fringe of 12 to 15 or worse. Like I said, he's fine, probably a decent tight end 2, but there's just not much upside with this offense behind A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith in the target pecking order, and possibly even behind Saquon Barkley at this point when all is said and done. I know they haven't typically targeted the running back that much over the past few years. There hasn't been a running back worth targeting in that backfield as much as Saquon Barkley. Saquon Barkley is a target-getting running back because he does a lot with the ball in his hands. As much as Swift has been touted for that, he's not to the level that Saquon Barkley is. Just fact of the matter is. But let's say Dallas Goedert is your tight end 1. There's a couple ways I'm looking to upgrade him. Maybe one for now, maybe one for later. Either which way, I want to get a better tight end if he's my tight end 1. I'm still all about buying TJ Hockenson at what I believe is a bit of a discount. I think you can do that by adding a second-round pick to Dallas Goedert. You might even be able to get a third-round pick back, depending on how these reports with TJ Hockenson go, with him being on the pup, off the pup, whatever the case is, coming into training camp. I know we had a bit of buzz, I guess you could say, that TJ Hawkinson's ahead of schedule. They're always ahead of schedule until they're not. But either which way, that's a pivot I'd like to make. But maybe you're a competitive team. That deal might not suit your fancy. Similar value right now, Dallas Goedert, George Kittle. And as much as George Kittle can be a little volatile, I know a lot of his scoring ends up lopsided into 1 week. A lot of times with tight end, if I can't have a guy who is putting up 15 points a week, whatever it is, a good, solid, reliable number. 15 is a little high for most reliable tight ends. But if I can't have a tight end like that I feel confident in getting me a handful of points every week, George Kittle's the next best option who can blow up any given week and really win the tight end position for you, or at least keep it close. And, we've heard some buzz with that wide receiver room too getting thinned out, either Brandon Ayuk possibly being on the move, or Deebo Samuel, probably leaning towards Brandon Ayuk at this point with his contract situation. But who knows? If that gets thinned out at all, George Kittle gets to move up the pecking order. He's not that old. He's not an old man like Travis Kelce is. So George Kittle's still worth having on your roster. And I think while Goddard is maybe the third in the pecking order, I still want Kittle's points more. Like I said, guy who can do a little bit more for you on the upside of points. Maybe not as young as Goddard, but definitely more points are going to get in your lineup. And if you're competitive, that's the way I want to go. Noah, what do you think about Dallas Goedert? What are some of your thoughts on this pivot? Any other thoughts, additions before we get out of here?
I think the addition of A.J. Brown and that combined with all the injuries that Goddard has had to fight over the past few years is just really, really tough on his potential, because I think Dallas Goedert is a great player. I think he is a very good tight end. Yeah. I think he has just been very unlucky at the end of the day. He's a guy I've always really liked, but I cannot deny the fact that he is just not the best fantasy option, even though he should be in a few different ways. But yeah, I think he will probably end up being like 4th in that offense, 5th if you want to count in Jalen Hurts on top of that. Sure. Talking about upgrading him to TJ Hockenson, I think that is perfect. If you add a second to Goddard, you're capitalizing off of Hawkinson's injury. You're capitalizing off of the, potential downgrade at quarterback play for the Vikings. Mm-hmm. I think is a perfect opportunity to steal your way up the board to Hockenson over Goddard. And, your point about Kittle too, a third in Goddard to get Kittle. Bad as I hate to say it, I feel like that's probably a pretty good value too, because I, just in my heart, I want to say I like Goddard more than Kittle. But, kind of reverse to what you were just saying about, JMO or Wandale, where, I agree. I prefer more of that consistency from a wide receiver, where I'd rather know that, from my second or third flex spot that I can get 8 points every week out of Wandale, rather than just like hoping for a blow up game from JMO or nothing. When it comes to a tight end, with it being so spread out, with the position I feel like being incredibly top heavy, I am okay with a little bit more inconsistency if we're not talking about Laporta or Kelsey, or Hawkinson when he's healthy. And Kittle is one of those guys that I do feel like falls more on the streakier side of things, but I'm okay with that for the tight end position. And so for that reason, just knowing that he's going to eat at some point in the Shanahan offense, San Francisco, I'm totally cool with the third and Goddard to get Kittle as well. So I think the valuations here are really good. Talking about Dallas Goddard just, makes me sad and hurts my feelings, but you got to do what you got to do sometimes in fantasy.
That was a great clarification on why taking the quote unquote boomer bust option at tight end versus a reliable wide receiver. And I think that boils down to, you only get one tight end. You may as well take a swing on as much upside as you can, as opposed to wide receivers. Yeah, if I can get 8 points out of my fifth wide receiver consistently when I need them in my flex, by all means. And I think something to clarify is, like, just because these players are quote unquote mid doesn't mean they're bad players. Some of these guys are
Yeah.
great NFL players. I'll say just about everybody on this list is a good NFL player, but at the end of the day, we're talking fantasy football. We're talking points in your lineup and how to build the best rosters possible. And the best way to do that, head on over to patreon.com/Dynasty Rewind. Get in that Discord server for a free 7-day trial. Check out the roster view option in the pinned comment below or in the YouTube description box. Get a 40% off discount. I said 40% off a roster view throughout the rest of the month using promo code Big Summer throughout the month of July. It is a huge deal. But with that said, we are going to get the heck on out of here. We will see you in the next one. But until then, I hope that y'all have a good one.